Andrew Whitman's breath caught in his chest as he slowly lowered his briefcase to the floor, the metallic click echoing faintly in the atrium, and for a moment, neither of them moved, time seeming to stretch and fold around the two of them. Lila Johnson, small yet unyielding, shifted the coat slightly, revealing a delicate, embroidered initial on the inside lining that mirrored the one on a photograph tucked deep in Andrew's wallet, a photo he had carried for decades, forgotten between meetings and travel schedules. He bent slightly at the waist, his eyes never leaving hers, his mind spinning with disbelief, trying to reconcile the meticulous structure of his adult life with the raw, undeniable truth standing before him. "I know you do not believe me," Lila said softly, her voice steady, almost a whisper, yet imbued with certainty that forced him to lean closer. "But this is the same coat. The one my mama showed me every time she told me about my daddy." Her small hands pressed the coat against her chest, and Andrew's eyes flicked to the subtle stains and worn patches, each imperfection a breadcrumb leading him back to a past he had tried to suppress. The lobby lights shimmered on the polished marble as if highlighting each breath and motion, and Andrew felt a weight settle in his stomach, a mix of longing and guilt, the years of absence pressing against him with every heartbeat. Lila took another step forward, the soles of her tiny shoes squeaking faintly, and she looked up at him with an intensity that demanded more than words could convey, demanding that he recognize her, acknowledge her, and see the connection that had been severed long ago. Andrew swallowed hard, his Adam's apple moving as he tried to speak, but the words lodged somewhere between disbelief and emotion, leaving only a strained, silent stare that seemed to hang in the air like the fragile balance of a glass sculpture ready to tip. Around them, employees and visitors paused, whispers curling through the atrium like gentle eddies in a still pond. Yet the room remained almost sacred in its hush, the kind of quiet that magnifies the importance of a single, small, and unguarded voice. Lila reached into the pocket of her worn jacket and carefully pulled out a faded photograph, holding it level with her eyes, showing a younger Andrew with a woman smiling in the golden sunlight of an afternoon long past. The same photograph that had prompted countless decisions and late-night reflections in his lonely penthouse office. "This is my mama," Lila said, her words deliberate, steady, a soft echo in the cavernous space. "And she always told me about you. She said you were brave and smart, and she hoped I would find you one day." The sound of her voice, layered with the weight of hope and memory, seemed to settle over Andrew like a tangible presence, pressing against the meticulous walls he had built around his emotions. He finally knelt slowly, bringing himself closer to her level, his hands hovering just above hers, unsure whether to touch the coat or the photograph, and in that small, deliberate pause, the world outside the atrium seemed to disappear. The distant hum of the elevator, the muted chatter from the lobby, and the subtle click of heels on marble all faded into insignificance as he whispered, almost to himself, "Lila, could it really be you?" Her lips pressed into a thin line, a mixture of nerves and determination, and she nodded, her brown eyes glistening but unwavering, reflecting trust, hope, and the quiet courage of a child who has carried the weight of truth across years. Andrew's pulse raced, a cocktail of shock, relief, and an aching desire to bridge the decades lost, as he extended a hand gently toward her, not to claim authority, but to offer connection. And in that silent, hovering moment, both of them seemed to recognize that nothing would ever be the same again, that this encounter, this revelation, was the beginning of healing, understanding, and a shared journey back into a world they had both longed for without realizing it. Andrew Whitman's hands hovered for a long moment over the photograph and the coat as if fearing that any movement might shatter the fragile bridge between past and present. Lila Johnson shifted slightly, her small shoulders straight, eyes unwavering, her breathing measured but with the faint tremble of nerves tucked. Behind her composure, the sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the atrium caught, dust particles dancing in the air, each tiny glimmer reflecting like the fragments of memories Andrew had long kept hidden from himself. He knelt fully now, his gaze locked on the embroidered initial inside the coat, tracing the faded thread with the tip of his finger, and with each detail recognized, the years of absence pressed upon him with a weight that was equal parts sorrow and awe. "I remember this," he whispered, his voice rough, more to himself than to her, as images of a small hand waving goodbye flashed across his mind. Summer days filled with music, laughter, and light, moments frozen in time until now. Lila stepped a little closer, the soles of her worn shoes tapping softly against the polished marble, and she held out the photograph, aligning it with the coat so that he could see the unmistakable match of patterns and folds, of shadows and light, that confirmed what her words could not yet fully convey. The atrium seemed to shrink around them. The distant sounds of elevators, hushed conversations, and the soft click of heels faded into a low hum, leaving only the two of them and the undeniable connection made tangible by fabric, paper, and memory. Andrew's eyes flicked between the photograph and Lila, the sudden clarity sharpening his perception, making every imperfection on the coat, every crease and faded stain, a symbol of years lived apart, yet connected through an unbroken thread of love and remembrance. Lila's voice, calm but insistent, broke the silence again. My mama said you would recognize me someday. I found the coat, and I thought maybe, just maybe, you would see me too. The sincerity and courage in her tone pressed on him like the tide, gentle yet impossible to resist. He exhaled slowly, the sound reverberating faintly off the walls, and reached out with one hand, hesitant at first, then more assured, brushing against hers as if to test the reality of the moment. The warmth of her small hand, the firmness of her grip around the coat, and the unwavering gaze of her brown eyes anchored him in the present, pulling him out of years of calculated routines and corporate meetings into a raw and immediate truth. For a heartbeat, the world outside, the busy employees, the muted traffic, the gleam of polished brass and glass, ceased to exist. It was just him and her, and the thread connecting them through memory and blood. Andrew finally let himself meet her eyes fully, the shock and the awe mixing with a well of emotion that had lain dormant, and he found himself speaking, though the words were soft, deliberate, and weighted with decades of absence. Lila, you have found me. Her lips pressed together, a slight nod confirming the truth, and the corners of her mouth lifted in the faintest trace of a smile, the kind that held both relief and the quiet bravery of a child who has waited patiently for a world to recognize her. He drew in a steadying breath, feeling the thaw of years of frozen emotion, and for the first time, allowed the reality of her presence, the reality of their connection, to wash over him completely, anchoring him, grounding him, and opening the first door toward reconciliation and understanding. Andrew Whitman slowly straightened, keeping his eyes locked on Lila Johnson as he extended both hands toward the coat and the photograph, a careful, deliberate movement that seemed to bridge the years between absence and reunion. Lila's small fingers tightened slightly around the fabric, and he felt the pulse of her quiet certainty, a rhythm steady enough to anchor him in a reality that was at once shocking and profoundly tender. The sunlight refracted across the marble, glinting off the brass railings and casting a warm glow on the intricate patterns of the coat, each thread and faded stain telling stories of days long past, memories preserved in cloth and scent. Lila tilted her head, her dark brown eyes wide and reflective, and spoke in a calm, measured voice. My mama always told me about you, Daddy. She said you were strong, and that one day I would find you. The words hung in the air, resonating with the weight of hope and the power of truth, and Andrew felt the ache of lost time pressing upon him, each second a reminder of moments he could never reclaim, yet now, miraculously, could begin to repair. He drew a slow, steady breath, the sound deep and resonant against the high ceilings, and knelt again, allowing himself to fully see her, really see her, and not merely as a reflection of a past he had left behind, but as a living, breathing presence demanding acknowledgement. Around them, the atrium remained hushed, the faint clatter of distant heels and the soft murmur of conversation fading into an almost sacred silence, as though the world itself had paused to witness this meeting. Lila held out the photograph, aligning it with the coat, the matching details drawing Andrew's eyes from her gaze to the tangible proof of their connection. The embroidered initials and faded colors, a direct link to memories that had remained unspoken for decades. This is my mama, she continued softly, her words imbued with clarity and courage. And she said you would know me when the time came. Andrew's fingers hovered above hers, trembling slightly, the weight of years of separation pressing on his chest. And yet there was an undeniable warmth in the touch that beckoned him closer, a bridge across decades of distance and silence. He finally allowed his hands to meet hers, resting lightly, not to claim, but to offer the recognition and connection that Lila had sought for so long. Her eyes glistened with a mixture of relief and determination, reflecting a steadfast trust that had carried her to this moment. And Andrew felt an unexpected clarity, the fog of past choices lifting slightly as he absorbed the reality of her presence. The coat in her arms became more than fabric. It was a symbol of endurance, memory, and the fragile yet persistent bond that had survived absence, distance, and uncertainty. He exhaled slowly, a long, steady release of breath that seemed to carry with it decades of unspoken longing, and finally, he spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "Lila, I see you. I see you now." The corners of her mouth lifted in a subtle, triumphant smile, a quiet acknowledgement of the journey that had brought them to this point, and together, they lingered in the moment, two souls bridging time and circumstance, the atrium around them fading into the background. As the present, the past, and the possibility of a shared future converged in the soft glow of understanding and the gentle pulse of renewed connection. Andrew Whitman rose slowly, keeping his gaze fixed on Lila Johnson as he motioned for her to follow him through the grand atrium, the sunlight streaming in through the tall windows casting long patterns on the marble floor, highlighting the polished brass railings and the subtle gleam of the intricate ceiling moldings. Lila stepped carefully, her small shoes making soft echoes, each tap measured and deliberate, carrying the weight of hope and the courage that had brought her to this moment. The coat remained clutched to her chest, a tangible thread connecting them to a past that had been lost but was now being reclaimed. As they moved past the reception desk, a few employees peeked over their monitors, whispers trailing behind them like soft currents. Yet none dared to break the spell of the moment, sensing that something profound and irreplaceable was unfolding. Andrew's voice, low and steady, broke the quiet as he spoke without looking directly at her. "Lila, I want to understand everything. Start from the beginning." The words carried a mix of awe, disbelief, and a dawning sense of responsibility that made the air between them feel heavier, charged with emotion. Lila nodded, her eyes reflecting the sunlight and an inner resolve, and she began recounting her memories, speaking softly but with clarity, weaving the fragments of her childhood, her mother, the moments of longing, the stories told at bedtime, and the ache of waiting for a father she had only known through stories. Each word seemed to lift invisible barriers, allowing Andrew to see her not just as a stranger claiming a connection, but as the living embodiment of a family he had left behind. The lobby, filled with the subtle hum of air conditioning and distant conversations, faded into a muted backdrop, the marble floors and high ceilings amplifying the intimacy of their exchange. Andrew adjusted his stance, drawing a deep breath as he processed the weight of her words, the significance of every detail she shared resonating with memories he had long locked away. A summer afternoon with the sun warming the backyard, the scent of freshly baked bread, the sound of laughter that had once been his own. Lila pulled gently on the coat, bringing his attention to the faint marks and frayed edges that matched descriptions he remembered from photographs and old letters, each imperfection a testament to the journey they had both endured separately and now together. He knelt once more, steadying himself on the marble, and extended a hand carefully, brushing the edge of the coat with his fingers, a silent acknowledgement of her truth and a tentative invitation into the connection they had both been denied for so long. The warmth of her presence, the courage radiating from her small frame, and the unwavering trust in her gaze created a stillness around them, a moment suspended in time where past mistakes and lost years could begin to mend. Andrew's voice, soft and reverent, carried through the atrium as he said, "Thank you for finding me, Lila, for giving me a chance to see you, to truly see you." She blinked, a faint smile touching her lips, the kind of smile that held triumph, relief, and the quiet assertion of a child who had carried hope across years, and together, they began moving toward the private elevator that would take them to the upper floors, a silent pact forming between them that this was only the first step in reclaiming what had been lost, and that the moments to come would be guided by care, understanding, and the bond that no absence could erase. The elevator doors closed with a soft whoosh, the sound muted against the polished brass interiors, and Lila Johnson clutched the coat a little closer, her small fingers pressing into the fabric as if it were a lifeline connecting her to the father she had only just found. Andrew Whitman stood slightly behind her, his tall frame filling the narrow space, yet every muscle and line of tension softened by the weight of recognition and the sudden intimacy of shared history. The digital floor indicator glowed above them, each ascending number marking a passage of time that felt both rapid and interminable, each second amplifying the anticipation and gravity of what awaited them on the upper floors. Lila glanced up at him, her eyes reflecting both nervousness and an unwavering determination. And in that glance, Andrew saw the echo of his own emotions mirrored in the earnestness of a child who had lived with hope as her only companion. The subtle hum of the elevator machinery filled the pause between their breaths, a quiet undertone to the symphony of emotions playing out in the enclosed space. And for a moment, both seemed suspended in a delicate balance where the past, present, and future converged. When the doors opened onto the private corridors, sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long patterns of gold across the polished floors, and Andrew gestured gently for Lila to follow, each step echoing softly, a rhythm punctuating their cautious, deliberate advance. The walls were lined with framed photographs, some depicting him at charity events, others of landscapes and places of personal significance. Yet Lila's gaze remained fixed on the coat and the fleeting glimpses of shared memory it evoked, every image along the corridor seeming to whisper of life lessons, missed opportunities, and moments he had long tucked away. They reached a quiet lounge area, the soft leather chairs and low tables offering a space removed from the formalities of business, and Andrew indicated a chair for her to sit, kneeling to be at her level, his hands resting lightly on the edge of the armrest, a subtle offer of comfort and attention. Lila lowered the coat onto her lap, smoothing the fabric with care, and began to speak, her voice calm but imbued with a gravity that belied her years, recounting small, intimate details of her upbringing, the stories her mother had told, the memories that had lingered in her mind, the moments she had clung to in the absence of a father. Andrew listened intently, nodding occasionally, the soft furrow of his brow betraying the torrent of thoughts and emotions stirred by her words, the weight of past choices pressing against the present, urging him toward understanding and connection. Outside the windows, the city moved in its usual rhythm, traffic humming along streets, distant sirens punctuating the soundscape. Yet inside the lounge, the world seemed to shrink, narrowing to the shared space between father and daughter. Lila's small hands pressed lightly against the coat, tracing the faded seams, and Andrew reached forward tentatively, his fingers brushing the fabric where her fingers rested, a gesture of recognition, a silent promise that he was here, that he was listening, that he intended to bridge the years that had kept them apart. The air seemed charged with anticipation, a subtle warmth settling over the two of them as words, glances, and the quiet gestures of understanding formed the foundation for a connection that had been absent for too long, each breath and movement, a step toward reconciliation, toward the possibility of shared memories yet to come. Andrew leaned back slightly, exhaling with a mixture of relief and awe, and spoke softly, his voice steady and deliberate. "Tell me everything, Lila. I want to know your story, from the very beginning." And in response, she lifted the coat slightly, her brown eyes meeting his, conveying courage, trust, and the promise of revelations that would continue to unfold, their journey together only just beginning. Andrew Whitman sank into the chair across from Lila Johnson, the sunlight now shifting to a softer angle, casting long shadows that played across the polished floor and illuminated the subtle details of the coat she still held close. The photograph rested between them, a fragile bridge connecting decades, and he reached out carefully, his fingertips brushing the edge of the paper as he absorbed each word she had shared, each memory etched into her voice and posture. Lila's small frame leaned slightly forward, eyes bright, speaking with a rhythm that wove her story into the space around them, recounting quiet mornings with her mother, afternoons of waiting and hoping, the small joys that had been fleeting and the challenges that had shaped her, all while maintaining a poise that seemed almost beyond her years. The hum of the building, normally an indifferent backdrop to his structured life, seemed to soften, the distant elevator chimes and muted footsteps fading into an almost reverent silence, leaving only the cadence of Lila's voice and the subtle sigh of air conditioning that threaded through the room. Andrew's gaze followed her closely, every nuance, every inflection, tracing the life she had lived in the absence of a father he had taken for granted, and with each sentence, he felt layers of time peel away, revealing the child he had once known only in flashes of memory and photographs. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, and spoke in a gentle tone, careful not to interrupt but wanting to anchor her in the present. "Tell me about your mama. Tell me how she spoke of the days we spent." Lila's lips curved into a faint, shy smile, the kind that contained both pride and the weight of longing, as she described her mother's careful words, the stories of small adventures, lessons of courage, and her own small acts of bravery and resilience that had carried her through nights of uncertainty. Andrew's hands moved instinctively, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear, careful to remain within the respectful space of their shared moment, and he felt the gravity of responsibility settle firmly on his shoulders, a stark contrast to the corporate decisions and abstract problems that usually filled his mind. Outside the tall windows, the city carried on, oblivious to the quiet miracle unfolding within the walls of the Whitman Tower. But inside, time felt suspended, as though the building itself held its breath in reverence. Lila shifted the coat slightly to reveal a faint mark, a small stain and worn seam that matched the description in her stories, and Andrew's breath caught, a wave of recognition and emotion flooding through him, grounding him in the undeniable reality of her presence. He leaned back, letting a soft exhale escape, the tension in his shoulders easing as he allowed himself to fully register the courage, patience, and persistence of the child before him. The two of them sat in the filtered sunlight, separated by inches but connected through history, memory, and the tangible proof of a life once shared. And in that quiet space, Andrew realized the profound weight of this encounter, the depth of Lila's trust, and the beginning of a path that could lead them both from absence into reconciliation, each word, gesture, and breath a step toward a shared future that neither of them could yet fully imagine, but one that was already quietly taking shape in the warmth and stillness of the moment. Andrew Whitman leaned back in the soft leather chair, his eyes never leaving Lila Johnson as she carefully unfolded the coat, revealing the delicate patterns and faded stitching that carried stories of years gone by. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long, warm beams across the room and highlighting the dust motes that drifted lazily in the air, creating an almost ethereal glow around the two of them. Lila's small hands traced the edges of the fabric as she spoke quietly, describing the afternoon she had spent with her mother, the quiet lessons about kindness and resilience, the whispered stories of a father she had never met but had imagined vividly in her mind. Andrew listened, absorbing every word, the subtle inflections and pauses conveying a depth of experience and patience far beyond her years. Each detail she shared seemed to open another window into the past, a past he had forgotten in the rush of meetings, deadlines, and distant travels, now illuminated by the innocence and courage of this child before him. He reached out slowly, brushing his fingertips against a worn seam, feeling the texture of the fabric and the passage of time embedded within it, and for a moment, the noise of the world outside, the distant hum of traffic, the faint chatter of employees in the atrium below, faded entirely, leaving only the quiet intimacy of the lounge and the unspoken connection forming between father and daughter. Lila's voice rose slightly, soft but firm, recounting the small victories and the moments of hope that had carried her through the uncertainty of childhood, her eyes meeting his with unwavering clarity, inviting him to share in the weight of her experiences and the emotions she had carried alone. Andrew's mind raced, connecting the images she described with memories long buried, the scent of lemon pie on a summer afternoon, the warmth of sunlight on the porch, the laughter that had once filled a home now only remembered through fragments. He exhaled slowly, the sound reverberating gently through the high ceilings, a quiet acknowledgement of the years lost and the opportunity that now stretched before them. Lila adjusted the coat in her lap, revealing a small embroidered initial that mirrored one he had kept tucked in a photo album. a tangible proof that bridged the gap between imagination and reality. He reached toward her hand, resting it lightly on the coat, a gesture of recognition and connection. The weight of the moment grounding him, and in her gaze he saw the trust, hope, and quiet bravery that had carried her to him. The light shifted, casting a warm glow across her face, illuminating the determination and gentle pride she held in every expression. And Andrew realized the significance of the moment. Not simply a reunion of parent and child, but the start of understanding, the beginning of healing, and the promise of a future shaped by the bond they had both longed for without fully knowing it. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "I will not let these years define us, Lila." And she responded with a small nod, the kind that held both relief and courage, and together they remained in the stillness of the room, the coat between them a symbol of connection, memory, and the fragile but enduring strength of family restored. The lounge remained quiet, the soft glow of the afternoon sun painting warm patterns across the floor as Andrew Whitman leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees, his eyes attentive, absorbing every subtle detail of Lila Johnson's expression. She held the coat lightly, the fabric still carrying the faint, familiar scent of his past, and she spoke with measured calm, each word carefully chosen, recounting moments of her early childhood with a clarity and poise that belied her 7 years. Andrew listened intently, nodding occasionally, allowing the silence between her sentences to linger, feeling the gravity of her experiences as if they were etched directly into the space around them. The distant hum of elevators and soft murmur of the atrium below seemed to fade away, leaving only the warmth of sunlight, the quiet creak of the leather chair, and the gentle cadence of Lila's voice. She described her mother's careful guidance, the small lessons on kindness, resilience, and hope, and Andrew found himself swept into the rhythm of her storytelling, each detail igniting memories long buried. Summer afternoons on the porch, the subtle aroma of lemon pies cooling on the windowsill, the laughter that once echoed through a home he had left behind. Lila's eyes met his, unwavering, as she detailed the moments of quiet courage she had taken upon herself, the times she had acted with responsibility beyond her age, the careful ways she had preserved the connection to her father through stories, the coat, and the photograph that now lay between them. Andrew's fingers flexed slightly, hovering near the coat, feeling the weight of years and the significance of the present, and he allowed himself to lean in closer, his voice soft, deliberate. "You have carried so much, Lila, and yet you have come to me with courage and trust." The words seemed to hang in the room, resonating in the space between them, and Lila's slight nod and the faint lift of her lips conveyed acknowledgement, pride, and quiet relief. Outside the tall windows, the city carried on, oblivious to the intimate exchange happening within the tower, but inside time itself seemed to stretch and bend, each second marked by careful glances, the subtle shift of weight, and the slow, deliberate gestures that created a bridge across decades. Andrew leaned back slightly, exhaling in a controlled, steady rhythm, and watched as she adjusted the coat in her lap, revealing a faint, familiar mark that matched the stories she had told and the memory he had carried for years. The connection between them, fragile yet undeniable, was reinforced by the soft warmth of the afternoon light, the quiet sanctuary of the lounge, and the attentive, unhurried focus of a father discovering his daughter for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. Each moment seemed to solidify the trust and bond forming, the gentle cadence of conversation intertwining with the physical proof of their shared history, creating a sense of continuity and understanding that had been missing for far too long. Andrew extended a hand carefully, lightly resting it near hers on the coat, a gesture of acknowledgement and recognition, and in that simple touch, both of them seemed to feel the weight and the promise of reconciliation, a bridge from past absence to future possibility, the space between them charged with the profound and unspoken significance of being together at last. Andrew Whitman remained kneeling slightly, the afternoon light softening around them as he absorbed Lila Johnson's words, the delicate cadence of her voice creating a rhythm that filled the lounge with the quiet weight of truth and revelation. Lila adjusted the coat in her lap, smoothing the fabric carefully, her small hands revealing the subtle stitching and faded patterns that had survived years of separation, and each detail seemed to anchor Andrew more firmly in the reality of her presence. He reached out slowly, resting a hand gently near hers, feeling the warmth and the steady courage she radiated. A tangible connection across decades of absence. Lila's brown eyes met his, unwavering and bright, as she spoke of her hopes and fears, of the nights she had imagined this moment, of the quiet determination that had carried her through uncertainty, each phrase revealing the depth of a child's understanding of love, loyalty, and the longing for a father she had only known through stories. The distant sounds of the city, the muted hum of elevators and footsteps along the marble corridors, receded into the background, leaving only the soft illumination of the sun through the windows and the profound stillness of two lives converging. Andrew's heart raced, the mixture of awe, regret, and relief pressing upon him as he traced the details of the coat with his eyes, recognizing the small imperfections and familiar folds as markers of time, proof of the journey that had brought them to this precise moment. Lila spoke of her mother's guidance, the lessons of resilience, kindness, and patience, and the ways she had preserved hope even in solitude, weaving her memories carefully into a narrative that allowed Andrew to see not just the child he had lost but the extraordinary strength she carried. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, and spoke in a measured, calm voice. "I have carried these years with me, and yet hearing your story makes me realize how much I have missed, how much we can still share." Her lips curved into a faint, resilient smile, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond forming between them, and the warmth of sunlight accentuated the gleam in her eyes, reflecting trust, hope, and the subtle triumph of a child who had journeyed across uncertainty to be recognized. Andrew reached carefully, brushing the edge of the photograph lying beside the coat, tracing the faint lines and colors that matched her words and her memories, a gesture of acknowledgement, of acceptance, and of the beginning of a shared future. Lila nodded slightly, a faint gleam of relief and quiet pride passing over her expression as she realized that he understood, that he saw her not merely as a child with stories, but as the daughter he had been separated from, and the bridge between past and present was now tangible. Outside the tall windows, the city moved in its familiar rhythm, oblivious to the intimate reconnection taking place. Yet within the lounge, time seemed to slow, each breath and gesture magnified by the significance of their reunion. Andrew's voice softened further, his words deliberate and reverent. "Let us walk forward together, Lila, and find the moments we have missed." And she responded with a subtle nod, the coat resting comfortably in her lap, their connection sealed not just by fabric or photographs, but by trust, recognition, and the promise of days to come. The lounge a quiet sanctuary where the past and the future met in the warmth and stillness of a bond renewed. The sunlight began to shift toward late afternoon, casting long golden slants across the lounge as Andrew Whitman and Lila Johnson remained seated, the coat resting between them, a silent testament to the passage of years and the bridge of understanding forming in its presence. Lila's small fingers traced the edges of the fabric, her gaze attentive and deliberate, reflecting the memories she carried and the courage it had taken to present them so openly. Andrew leaned slightly forward, his tall frame now softened by emotion, absorbing every word, every inflection, every subtle pause, the rhythm of her storytelling echoing in the quiet space, filling the room with the weight of truth and reconciliation. She spoke of ordinary days turned extraordinary by hope, of lessons learned from her mother about patience, kindness, and persistence, and of the small ways she had maintained a connection to a father she had never known, all while navigating the challenges of her own life with dignity and determination. The distant hum of elevators and the muted footsteps along the marble corridor faded, leaving only the warmth of sunlight, the subtle creak of the leather chairs, and the delicate cadence of a child's voice conveying stories that spanned years. Andrew's eyes followed her every movement, every gesture, taking in the careful way she handled the coat, the gentle lift of the photograph, the thoughtful pauses between sentences, and he felt a profound mix of awe, relief, and an urgent desire to make up for the years lost. He reached slowly, brushing his fingertips lightly against the coat, a gesture of acknowledgement and connection, and Lila's eyes met his, unwavering and bright, as if measuring the sincerity of his attention and presence. Outside, the city continued in its familiar rhythm, the distant sounds of traffic and pedestrian movement muted against the quiet intensity of their shared space. and the sunlight now cast a soft, almost reverent glow, highlighting the subtle details of the room and the expressions on their faces. Lila spoke of her hopes and quiet victories, the moments of self-reliance that had shaped her, the careful ways she had preserved memories and kept the promise of finding him alive, and Andrew absorbed it all, each phrase reinforcing the reality of their connection, the tangible proof of her bravery and patience. He let out a long, steady breath, the sound reverberating gently, and whispered softly, "I understand, Lila, I see you, truly." His words deliberate and reverent, carrying the weight of decades of absence and the recognition of the life they could now begin to share. Her lips curved into a subtle, triumphant smile, the kind that held pride, relief, and hope, and Andrew felt the first real warmth of family, the first glimmer of days that could be shaped together, anchored in trust, memory, and the undeniable bond that had survived time and separation. The coat, resting in her lap, became more than fabric. It was a symbol of endurance, of love preserved across distance, and of the fragile yet unbreakable connection between a father and daughter finally reunited. The late afternoon sunlight bathing them both in a quiet, golden affirmation of new beginnings. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow across the lounge, painting long, warm streaks across the polished marble floors as Andrew Whitman and Lila Johnson continued to sit across from each other, the coat resting between them as a tangible symbol of history and connection. Lila adjusted the fabric gently in her lap, her small fingers tracing familiar seams and worn threads while she recounted further details of her childhood, the quiet routines, and the subtle acts of courage and compassion she had carried out that had shaped her perspective and maintained her hope of one day being recognized by the father she had only known through stories. Andrew listened intently, his tall frame slightly hunched forward, the soft crease of concern on his forehead giving way to a look of awe and reflection. Each word she spoke unfolding the layers of her experiences and painting vivid images that transported him into her world of both struggle and resilience. The faint hum of air conditioning and the distant click of elevator doors faded into the background, leaving only the intimate sound of her voice, the gentle shift of her posture, and the occasional soft rustle of the coat as it moved with her hands, a rhythm that seemed to anchor them both in the gravity of the moment. She spoke of her mother's teachings, the quiet insistence on dignity and integrity even in moments of scarcity, the careful ways she had documented memories and preserved tokens that kept the essence of family alive, and Andrew absorbed every detail with a growing sense of recognition, not just of the child before him, but of the enduring bond that had persisted despite years of absence. He reached out tentatively, placing a hand lightly on the coat near hers, feeling the warmth and the subtle strength in her presence, a gesture of reassurance and connection, and Lila met his gaze steadily, her brown eyes reflecting a mix of trust, hope, and the quiet triumph of a child who had patiently carried her own truth to be seen. The sunlight now angled more sharply through the windows, casting soft shadows that highlighted the expressions on their faces, the subtle movement of breath, the delicate interplay of anticipation and recognition. Andrew's voice was low and measured as he spoke. "I want to know everything, Lila, every moment, every detail you have kept with you." And she responded with a gentle nod, lifting the coat slightly to reveal a faint, familiar mark that aligned perfectly with her stories, a silent confirmation of her narrative and the life they had both lived separately. The room seemed to settle into a quiet reverence, the outside world of traffic and pedestrian noise receding into insignificance as the father and daughter shared this sacred space. Each word, gesture, and glance a step toward healing and understanding. Andrew allowed himself to breathe fully, feeling the years of absence and uncertainty slowly lift as he absorbed the depth of her experience and the trust she had extended to him, and in response, he offered an attentive smile, a steady presence, and the assurance that he would no longer let distance or time define their relationship. The coat remained between them, both a relic and a promise, a bridge between past and future. And in the warm glow of the late afternoon sun, Andrew realized that this was not just a reunion, but the beginning of a shared journey of discovery, understanding, and the careful rebuilding of family, each moment stretching into the next with a quiet, deliberate intimacy that held the power to reshape the years they had lost and illuminate the possibilities yet to come. The sun had begun its slow descent, painting the Whitman Tower lounge with deep amber and gold, the shadows stretching long across the polished marble floors as Andrew Whitman and Lila Johnson continued their quiet communion, the coat resting between them like a bridge across lost time. Lila's small hands adjusted the fabric, revealing each worn seam and subtle imperfection, a testament to years of memory preserved in thread and scent. And as she spoke softly, recounting moments of laughter, patience, and quiet resilience from her earliest years, Andrew felt the weight of absence and the depth of love converge in the space around them. The faint hum of air conditioning, the soft click of distant elevator doors, and the muted city sounds beyond the windows receded completely, leaving only the delicate rhythm of her words and the profound silence of mutual recognition. He leaned slightly forward, his tall frame softened by the gravity of the moment, tracing the subtle contours of the coat with his eyes, the faded initials and worn edges igniting memories of afternoons in sunlit yards, quiet evenings with family laughter echoing through rooms, and the scent of cedar and vanilla from a home he had once known and had lost. Lila's voice remained steady, narrating the careful ways she had kept her mother's stories alive, the lessons of courage and dignity, and the moments she had clung to the promise that one day her father would see her, would recognize her, and would acknowledge the bond that had never truly been broken. Andrew exhaled slowly, the sound almost reverberating against the high ceilings, his hands moving lightly near hers without touching, a gesture of tentative connection and reverence. And in the warmth of the afternoon sunlight, he felt a fragile thaw of decades of absence, a softening of the years that had separated them. She lifted the coat slightly, revealing once more the small mark that tied her story to his memory, and their eyes met fully, a quiet understanding passing between them, an acknowledgement of the courage, trust, and endurance that had carried her to this moment. The light played across her face, illuminating the soft curve of her cheek, the glint of determination in her eyes, and the subtle expression of relief and pride that whispered of a victory both private and profound. Andrew's voice was low, deliberate, and reverent as he spoke. "Lila, you have brought me back to what truly matters." And the words seemed to linger, weaving around the warmth of the sunlight, the stillness of the lounge, and the steady presence of a child who had journeyed across years of uncertainty to claim a place beside him. Lila's lips curved in the faintest smile, a quiet expression of triumph, trust, and hope, and she shifted the coat gently in her lap, a tangible symbol of endurance, memory, and love. Outside the windows, the city moved on in its usual rhythm, yet within the quiet sanctuary of the lounge, time seemed to stretch, each breath and gesture magnified by the weight of reunion, recognition, and the promise of a future they would now shape together. Andrew extended a hand softly, resting it near hers on the coat, the simple act speaking volumes about acknowledgement, care, and commitment. And as they sat together, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, the space between them felt alive with possibility. The fragile yet unbreakable bond of father and daughter finally, fully realized. The coat a silent witness to the years lost, the courage found, and the beginning of a shared journey filled with understanding, hope, and the quiet power of love restored.